Well, when I was coming right out of college, my sister asked me to meet her in Italy for a vacation. She was living in Europe at the time and said, man, why don't you meet me over there? But I haven't made any plans, so can you sketch out an itinerary and just meet me in Rome? And so I went for the next several days, pulled out all these different books and began to study Rome because I wanted to see all the ancient sites, and I was trying to sketch out an itinerary for a few days in Rome, a few days in Florence, a day in Cinque Terre. And so as I was doing that, it dawned on me, wait a minute, I have one buddy that's been there. And he's journeyed through there. Let me ask him his experience of how to maximize my time visiting all these amazing ancient sites. And so I sat down with him and I said, man, show me how to use my time. He's like, no problem, dude. He was like, Rome, you're going to want to give it at least 3 days. He said, the first day, you're going to go to the Pantheon. Pantheon was an ancient temple to the gods, finished by Emperor Hadrian. You're going to want to show up there and walk past it and take a left because there's a gelato spot there. And they got rice-flavored gelato, and you're going to want to make sure you try it. I'm like, what? And then he was like, and then the next day, you're going to want to go to Vatican City. Leave yourself all day because there's a gelato place right out front, and the line gets really long. And he's like, and then when you go to the ancient city, you'll see where Paul was in prison, the gelato place there. And I was like, wait, stop. What are you talking about? What is this gelato? And he was like, man, it's like ice cream, but it's just different. It's so much better. And I was like, man, I've had ice cream. Kind of thought we'd be talking more about Michelangelo's David. That's a bit more my priority than ice cream. And so I tell you what, I blew off his advice. I just got my own little itinerary. My sister and I went there, and for the first several days, we're seeing ancient sites. Absolutely amazing. I love Italy. It's incredible. And then as we were leaving the Pantheon after visiting it at one point, I said, you know what, there's this buddy of mine that was going on and on about this ice cream or whatever. I think we should go try it. And so we turned the corner, went to that place, and I ordered the weirdest looking one there. I was like, give me the rice flavored gelato. And they handed it to me. And I remember I put it in my mouth and instantly mourned all those wasted days in Italy. I had not been ingesting this substance, and I repented before God and all of Italy for my mistake, and I reoriented the rest of our trip that ne'er would we miss a gelato space again. And I remember it dawned on me, man, I had ice cream. I had even had stuff called gelato here in the States, but that was something else. It was made with a different ingredients. So much so that when my wife and I went back and she said, what's our itinerary? I was like, well, next to the Pantheon, we're gonna take a left. And I just did the same thing. I know the names are the same, but the ingredients here are so different. Now, why do I say that? Because we've been talking about relationships, we're talking about singleness, we're talking about how to date, we're talking about engagement, and now we're on to marriage, and it's been fascinating to me. I've read so many articles about the state of marriage today, so many interviews with young people, and I've done so many myself, and I gotta tell you what I imagine many of you already know, marriage has fallen on a bit of hard times. That's still the vast majority of people in America that are unmarried say they want to be married, and the vast majority will get married, but less will be married than ever before. People are waiting longer to do it, and I see a pervasive cynicism about it. Even recently, as I read reports from people saying, you know what, I watch my relatives' marriages. I've seen every single one get divorced. I've seen uncles get divorced and cousins, my own family, I've seen the pain in it, and so I don't even know if I want to be a part of that. Or I read a report even now in The Atlantic, came out this week, that said, you know, maybe marriage isn't even our best social institution. And you see a cynicism because a lot of pain. And when I read that, I understand it. Romance is a wonderfully powerful thing and a potentially very damaging thing. And many of us have been hurt by it, and many of us have been hurt by marriages that have gone wrong. Our parents or people around us we care about. And so what I hear in the culture is people say, yeah, I've tried that. I've seen that. It's not working for me. And what I hear is, man, I've had ice cream. And I say, you know what? But there's a different set of ingredients. And I feel like you're missing out on the real thing. You got something called marriage, and yet it's missing some of the key elements that make it so sweet. And for me, I've been married for 15 years, and I tell people all the time, we're the happiest we've ever been in our marriage. And I can see in some people just that twinge of doubt. And I want to tell them, I promise you, you've not had gelato like this, right? There's a different set of ingredients that make it better than maybe what you've experienced so far. And I say that because, we've got marriage, and honestly, in the country today, as I was reading all these articles this week about people rejecting marriage, they were rejecting it for reasons that I would reject too. They were saying marriage is just a lie. You promise someone you'll be faithful and then you end up cheating on them, or marriages don't last and all that. And I go, you're rejecting the real because of the counterfeit. You're rejecting the real because of its abuses. Let's not do that. Let's go back to the real. Let's go back to created intent, because marriage is not an institution created by America. It's created by God. That we saw that Paul in Ephesians will quote Genesis chapter 2, that at the very beginning of humanity, God created this. Marriage is designed by God. And if we want beautiful marriages, let's look how the original author put it together, because when he made it, it was good. And you see in Genesis, as God was creating the world, 7 times as he was creating the foundations of our world, he said, it's good, it's good, it's good. And then we get our first not good. He said, it's not good for that man to be alone. And he wasn't technically alone. God was there, and there's a lot of animals, but there's a big difference between watching a sunset with a woman or with a Cocker Spaniel. And God said, this is not good. Like, you're meant to have community. It doesn't have to be strictly romantic, but we're meant to commune with one another. And so God knocked Adam out and then brought forth from his rib a woman. And when Adam saw her, he said, God made a helper suitable to him. Now, helper always sounds like it's diminishing. It's not meant to do that. God is called a helper in Psalm. And if you really feel like it diminishes it, helpers do what? They help. Who needs help? People who need help. And so it's a merciful thing to Adam. God saw this and said, this is not good. This man needs help. And Eve came into the picture, and what happened? When God is in the midst of a relationship, Adam sees her and he breaks into song. At last, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, you're like me. You're a complement to me, is what the text says. Peter called her a co-heir in the grace of life, because Genesis 1 says that both male and female, created in the very image of God. He says, at last, one like me. You see poetry, you see beauty, you see vulnerability, but safety. I can be completely nude before you, transparent before your gaze, and yet feel safe. You have all of me. It is good. Marriage, the way God intended it, is good. It's designed by God and works well. And yet many of us don't see it that way. Why? Well, Genesis 3. When humanity severs the relationship with God, it's not just the relationship that breaks, everything downstream is poisoned. And you see the relationship gets difficult. Now this man who used his power to care, it says that he will rule over you. There'll be a domineering relationship here. That you'll see a difficulty enter into their relationship, so much so that what happens? Often I talk to people and they talk about the brokenness in their families. And they say it like it's a distancing thing from the rest of humanity. Well, y'all don't understand my family. You don't know what my parents are like. You don't know what my experiences. Look at the very first family. When there was just 4 humans on the planet, one brother murders the other. So some people think their pain in their family isolates them from the human story. No, the whole human story started crazy. That if you came to me and said, hey, one of my family members murdered the other, I'd say, that's a terrible story. But that's where all of our stories started. Families broke early. And as soon as we severed from God, families broke. And then Genesis, in poetic fashion, follows you 7 lineages down, the number of perfection. Let's see perfectly what happens when our relationships wander from God. What happens? And 7 generations down in those genealogies you never read, a guy named Lamech comes up. And you see 7 generations of journeying away from God. What do you see? Lamech shows up and he says a poem to his 2 wives, Ada and Zillah. Ladies, tell me if this would stir your heart. You meet a guy, Lamech, seems nice. Lamech means conqueror, sounds like a go-getter. So he brings you on a honeymoon and sits you down next to his other wife and recites this poem. Listen to me, wives of Lamech. Feeling a little something? I have killed a man for wounding me, a boy for striking me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. And you go, what's the deal with that? When we're severed from God, what happens to this man? Ego takes hold. And out of his ego, he says, if someone even tries to wound me, I'll kill him. Even a boy in the flower of his youth, I'll murder him if he offends me. And then when it comes to women, no longer is a woman my co-heir. Now I'll take two of you, and their names translated mean ornament and tinkling. You think he cares about their intellectual concerns? Women become candy and disposable to be used by this man. You see that when we break our relationships away from God, every relationship breaks, and women lose, and men lose. And so many people today say maybe marriage is a dead institution, and what they're looking at is Lamech. And I would say I reject it too, and so does God. This is not what God made. The abuse that we see in a lot of our relationships, no one gets wounded more than people in romantic relationships in our culture, but that wounding is not the real. It's ice cream, but there's gelato here. That marriage is an institute designed by God. And when we use it his way, it's good. That's why Paul circles around to it in this passage. In Ephesians, he's talking in the first 3 chapters, there's no commands for you. It's all a story of what God has done for you. About how into our brokenness, a healer was sent. Into our woundedness, one to bind up our wounds. Into our distress, a hero has come, Jesus Christ, to forgive, rescue, restore, redeem, bring you home. And then he shows you how to walk in this life. And he says, don't walk as unwise, but walk as wise. Wisdom is, I understand how God made the world, and I'm gonna walk that way. And he says, don't be drunk with wine. Don't be controlled by a beverage, but be controlled by the very Spirit of God. That the best way to live life is the way God intended, filled with his Spirit, walking according to his word. And he says, as we do that, we'll speak to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. We won't use words to hurt each other, cut each other down, diminish each other, like some of you have experienced in your home. We'll speak life-giving words, encouraging words, caring words. And then as it bleeds into the family, he says, and we will submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, wives to our husbands. He says marriage is designed by God. And when we use it his way, we all flourish.